from their encounters with races from other planets. The information is the activation. Let's awaken this world together. We are the forever students, and we will not be silent. We are the ones that we've been waiting for. Pretty well. Hey, hey, hey. What's up, everybody? Welcome to Full Spectrum University and Battle broadcast from behind enemy lines in the once great state of New York. My name is Rob Yox. We are in for an amazing episode. Tonight, we are going back into Galactical Beginnings. This is part 14. We're going to be talking about from the 1900s on up. And you're going to say to yourself, wait a minute. We just went over 0 AD. So what happened within those 1900 years? Now, while there was a lot going on, a lot of the entities and galactical beings stayed behind the scenes cultivating different communities, such as we talked about Rome, we talked about Greece, we talked about Asia, we talked about North America. So we get to the point of essentially where, the English, the French, the Spanish, the Italian, they all start to migrate towards America. Plenty of sightings throughout much and most of that time, but no direct real interference, except until we get into the Industrial Revolution. For the most part, most of these entities decided to take a backseat for a while because they thought that, while things were what they were, they made a pact to not interfere. And that was held up for a very, very long time. So we're going to get into the 1900s. For the first thing we're going to talk about is the Vril Society, right? The Vril Society is known, and the secret societies is where the Cabal kind of got their grappling hooks into society as a whole and started to get to where we are today. So we're starting to get near the end of the galactical experience that we have so far. But I left a very, very important poll on the community posts because I want this to be an interactive platform. I want everybody to be able to say, I want to see that, I want to see this, and in which order we do it, right? I have a lot of things on the back burner working as we're talking, and while we're doing these shows. So I'm gathering more information to do a lot more different presentations. So I asked the question of the four different topics that we had up there. I will fill you in on what is what at this moment. And so the important poll was to make this, like I said, the most interactive. One of the actual picks was extraterrestrial races and history of those extraterrestrial races, kind of playing off what we did here. There is the wing makers, and that's the breakdown of all the interviews, which looks like it's in dead last right now. We have Atlantis, Lemuria, and Mu, full breakdowns of the peoples and cultures, and also levels of consciousness and dimensional density. So right now it looks like it's extraterrestrial races, levels of consciousness, Atlantis, Lemuria, then the wing makers. And I did that because I want to make sure that, everybody gets to what they want to see, right? So all of those are going to be done. We're just trying to figure out in which order. So it looks pretty solid with extraterrestrial races. I will start making up some of the slideshows and we'll get into it. Tonight, we're going to try and get as far as we can. This is a section where it starts to get very convoluted between the different stories being told at the same time. Alien life had gone dormant, most of it into Agartha and places like that, under Earth, huge, right? So in the early 1900s, when the Industrial Revolution starts to come back, we can really get into the different styles of how they actually corrupted specific peoples to do their bidding. Now, of course, there's good and evil in all ways. During this early period in the 1900s, we see a lot more of the bad than good. And we know because there was 2 world wars, there was there was a lot going on. So we're going to get into a lot of that behind the scenes stuff. As I said, I'm going to get as far as I can tonight, and then whatever we don't finish tonight, we'll finish on Sunday. Sunday will be the next episode. It'll be part 15. So right now, I want everybody to please share this stream out. It is important because now we're getting into local history, as in timeline, right? Local history is where we can really open up people's hearts and minds to something different and to maybe something else going on behind the scenes leading into today. So it's super important so we can lift veils for people. So, with that being said, we're going to get to the presentation. Galactical Beginnings Part 4, Reemergence of Extraterrestrial Technology and the Vril. There will be a lot of talk of the Nazis in this as well, because that leads us to two different stories that tie off from that spot. One is the SSP, or Secret Space Program, as many of us know. The other is global domination, right? So we're going to kind of segue between those two and make sure we really work both of those arcs out properly. So let's get into it. And just a note in the very beginning, right? Right now, the work that we saw before was a lot of reading, a lot of different people corroborating. So, how did I get to put it back on me for a second? So, how did I get to what was happening here, right? We have history that we know via textbooks. And that tells a lot of the story. But to get the backhand story, we have to take a lot of eyewitness accounts, right? Which come firsthand, various reports from insiders, as well as historical documents and photography. And ironically, in some ways, I trust the information that preceded this point more than the following. And I'm going to tell you why, because, all of history that we have recounted here up and until now came through, personal soul memory, archaeological discoveries, myth, channeling, direct contact, things like that. But now we're kind of honing into a little bit more of what people were experiencing firsthand, right? So there's a lot of disinformation that could potentially pollute the timeline. So I'm trying to do my best to keep away from those entities and make sure that we follow a specific path and how we're going to address this information to make sure that everything had to be vetted, right? Everything had to be vetted 3, 4, 5 times before I could actually put it into this timeline. So that's why it might seem a touch scattered, but it's because we know that those are the events that happened and we can see them play out in real time, right? So let's get back into it. So basically, right now we're at 900 AD. 900 AD it's a wild time. It's the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, or towards the not so much the center, but it's around the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution. I think the Industrial Revolution is 1890 to 1935, and then it expands further when we start to get into other stuff. So this is where we once again are going to pick up and the detailed threads of this history, for this is when the most recent events that set the stage for our current situation really got underway, right? And I think that that's super important to know and super important to think about. So the first peoples that we have here is the Vril Society, right? It all started with this group. There were many secret societies at this time and in many parts of the world, both positive and negative, where who were experimenting with consciousness and had been passing down the traditions since the time of Atlantis and Muse. So we know that they're trying to elevate their consciousness through ancient teachings via word of mouth documentation. But but we're going to focus on the Vril, for it was they who first left the surface of Earth and began exploring the solar system and our galaxy. So we're going to start with the person who pretty much started the Vril Society, and it was Maria. Maria Orestich, I think I'm saying it right, was born 1895 in Zagreb, Croatia, and exhibited psychic talents early on. Her interest in the occult eventually led her to a secret society. And then, of course, we also have the Thule Gesellschaft in Munich, which is also a counterpoint of this specific society, of the Vril Society, where she trained and cultivated her abilities. And then, not after long after joining the Thule, she created her own group among her female friends. In fact, the Vril Society seems to have been comprised entirely of stunning women with psychic abilities, which, you know, it goes to show that there's a manipulation here. And they're trying to use these specifically good looking women to impose their will and power over things. Now, a lot of people see the Vril Society as bad. And there's points where they're good and bad. Again, nothing is polarized completely. We have the good and the bad resides in everything. So there's gray areas. But we're going to talk about these gray areas because this is where things start to pick up, right? And in the process of their meditations and cultivations of consciousness, they were physically they were met physically with two different groups, one close to home and one not so close to home. The first group they encountered in their astral travels was a local reptilian group, the Draco, who dwelt in Agartha underneath the surface of Earth, they were much enamored with the beauty of these females, which is why they reached out. And no doubt that they had a dark agenda in mind for them down the road as well. So we see Maria and her friends were fascinated and intrigued to be contacted with another race of beings, but also soon picked up their aggressive and vicious energy despite the charming intellect and, you know, all that they were projecting at this moment in time, which is really, again, this is for manipulation. They are manipulating these females, but they are also the females are manipulating them. So they saw a common group kind of thread forming here, right? So the Vril also encountered a second group of extraterrestrial beings, and these were the Nordics, a benevolent Aryan human type of fifth density consciousness who live on a planet circling our closest neighbors in Alpha Centauri. And I'm going to bring it back to me real quick because when I went on my honeymoon, I was drawn to Alpha Centauri. At every moment I walked outside in the night sky, I was literally drawn to it. Like I felt that there was a piece of me that resided there, that I was longing to be there. So it was when I saw this pop up in the information that I was gathering, I was like, "Holy crap! Look at the synchronicity here, right?" It's pretty incredible that I'm the one telling you this while looking at these stars and feeling something a little bit more than some other people. So I don't know if I'm a star seed from Alpha Centauri yet. I mean, I'm still working on a lot of this stuff, but Alpha Centauri is a place that I feel myself gravitating towards or pulled to. So let's keep going. So over time, the members of the Vril group became more and more inclined towards the messages and the purposes of this Nordic group, and they abandoned their relationship with the Draco, which definitely ruffled some feathers or possibly scales if you're a Draconian, right? So the Nordic group asked Maria to gather a select group of people together on a certain day for the purpose of receiving detailed plans for construction of a spaceship. And so when the time came, the Vril gathered together in a small forest cabin out in the middle of nowhere. And this cabin was in Berchtesgaden, I think I'm saying that right, Germany. And it was on that cold winter day in 1919 that Sigrun, that's the basically, this channeled entity, detailed out plans to them for what would be the first machine capable of advanced interdensity travel built by Homo sapiens. So again, they're getting plans from a channeled entity that essentially is telling them to build an interdensity travel spacecraft, right? Or craft, shall we say. And this would be the first of the Homo sapiens completely. So it's, to me, this is the beginnings of the secret space program. This is the first people on Earth who are having the ability to potentially leave Earth. So, you know, this isn't normal per se for this time period. So let's keep going. So, over the next few years, Maria and her friends established a base of operations, and with the assistance from the Nordic group, recruited a massive number of people from all across Germany and the surrounding countries to build several craft. These first machines weren't flying ships in the normal sense. Rather, they were disc shaped craft enable one to move through time and space by traveling into higher densities and then moving around by thought. And these were massive crafts intended to transport large numbers of people off planet. So this is, we're talking several years later from 1919, we're talking 1930s Germany. And we know what figures are going to come into play very shortly. Now, again, we're not lending any of our energy to this information. We're simply taking from it what we need to gather understanding, right? So we're not going to be triggered by the things that are said. We're not going to let our emotions get the best of us. We're going to look at this stuff logically because, this is the advice I could give to you. If you start to attach yourself to a lot of this negative information, it's going to have a negative effect on your karmatic soul, and you're going to have tremendous issues down the line trying to figure things out and creating discernment and gut feelings. It's going to hurt you. You have to, exactly. Sure, got it right. You have to understand it, but you can't dwell on it. You have to look to why it's important, retrieve the information of which you need from it, and move on, right? Move to the next step and see what's next. Because what's next is always better during the darkest of times. Just like they say, it's always darkest before the dawn. So we have to look at these specific areas in time that are very hard to look at and understand why they were moving the way that they were moving, right? And why these cultures were clashing, but also why there was these pacts made that came out of left field. It's because of outside ET influence. We're going to get to that too. Now, this specific episode is going to be a little bit more of the history book heavy with a little bit of what's going on behind the scenes because the entities will not make themselves known tremendously until after World War II. But we're going to touch on a little bit in Germany, and we're going to go to LA for the next segments, right? Let us keep going. So, word of this got out through the network of secret societies. Hitler, Goring, and Himmler were all members of this Thule society. And so it was that the emerging German political party, with great interest in the occult, got wind of the development of these crafts. The Nazis, obviously. And we know that the Nazis were hunting for everything occult or ancient or extraterrestrial that would give them a leg up on a battlefield. That was what they put their mission to work across Europe, across India, across Asia fully, across Africa, and even across the United States. They tried to find different ancient weapons that would help them win. So in their hunt for all things occult, the Nazis, I didn't get to this slide, but this is two people talking, right? The Dual Society. So in their hunt, right, the Nazis had already gotten hints of Agartha, ETs, and advanced technology by searching through Tibetan monasteries in the Himalayas, where they found records that had been recopied, preserved, and passed down from the time of ancient Mu. Remember, the ancient Mu settled close to Tibet. They discovered plans for what looked like spacecraft, and through questioning the monks, they discovered that these holy men were actually in contact with various inner Earth groups. So we're seeing this happen. And in this picture here, you see the Nazis are addressing these Tibetan monks, which is a pretty rare picture to find. I'll tell you that. This is a difficult picture to find out there. You may come across it randomly, but it took me a long time to find this because I knew I had seen it before, and I wanted to make sure that we got this. This is another aspect of this time period is there's photographical evidence, right? And that's kind of gives us a little bit more of a leg up on what we're talking about. So basically, that happens. A few years later, just when their ships were nearing completion, the Vril Society were captured by the Nazis, right? Who took They took over their entire facility and interrogated each member of the Vril. This particular significant is it's particularly significant to us because though this chain of events that the Nazis were first introduced to the Draco and the relationship with them will be of prime importance for the rest of the story. So the Nazis come in contact with the Draco for the first time when capturing the Vril Society, because when they interrogated them, the Vril gave up that they were in contact with two different groups. So Maria and the Vril had friends in very high places, though, they brought pressure to bear on the Nazis, and the Vril they were released without being harmed. Also, Hitler was happy enough to have the relationship now with the Draco, and he figured he could infiltrate or take over the Vril group at a later time if he so desired, right? And we see this play out. This is a photo from Star Trek with a reptilian type entity in a Nazi uniform. So is art imitating life, or is life being imitated by art? Right? We know Star Trek is a tremendous gateway into what was happening galactically because Gene Roddenberry tapped into that tremendous consciousness and that galactical consciousness and was given information. And guys, don't forget after this at 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, 5 p.m. Pacific, we have um, Watchers Talk is doing Protocols of Saturn. We're doing our back-to-backs. We're back in the rhythm. We're back doing every other day now. And yes, this is from Star Trek Voyager. They get stuck in time and have to make their way out of time. I believe they were stuck in the holodecks where essentially they couldn't get out, but it was set to kill in the holodecks, right? But back to the story. This is art imitating life. We know this to be true. Let us keep going. So Maria and the Vril friends, of course, they had their people in high places again, and the Nazis figured they could take them anytime they wanted. So the Vril group managed to leave the planet. They explored out into our galaxy and came back a few times using underground bases in Antarctica for their home base. But eventually, Maria and her friends evolved enough in consciousness through their interactions with the Nordics that they ascended, meaning they gained the ability to live in the fourth density and eventually the fifth density. Now, let's bring this back to me real quick. This is evidence that we're trying to achieve this state of consciousness now. And there are humans just like me and you who have achieved it, right? To me, that's wild. That shows that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, right? This is what it's all about. That new earth, fifth density. These people already got there, right? So it's all possible. Nothing is off limits. Nothing is off limits, guys. Let's keep going. So we know that now they're residing within the fifth density. Maria put her learning to good use and went on to take the name Simjese, right? This is what she looks like. This is a depiction of Maria coming out of her Vril craft in the 70s to greet people. She also didn't age, and she looked more like the Nordics than she did before. You see, her jawlines are a bit different. This is a sketch, almost like a police sketch, right? And then they have, of course, the painting of her coming out. So, she returned to Earth in the 1970s to spread the teachings of unconditional love and harmony that radiated out from the fifth density. But nothing had been heard from her or the Vril since that time. So now she and the Vril came back in the 70s and then they left. Now the Nordics were a bit different, right? The Nordics, when we start to get to the Battle of LA and things like that, we see this entity called Valiant Thor, or Valen Thor, and he is here for upwards of 80 years, looking exactly the same. We're going to get into him later on, because we're going to come back, and he's a figure that I really want to do justice for and get all the information on. We're going to keep going. So now we get to 1942. And the Nazis they've perfected anti-gravitic flight. Okay, they took the knowledge they had gotten from the Draco, which they had been working on since the 20s, and later kidnapped a prominent scientist by the name of Victor Schornberger. Well, here he is, right here, Victor Schornberger, to implement some new ideas to the entire, structure of their intergalactical fleet. They had, like the Vril, already perfected interdensity travel, but they had yet to perfect anti-gravitic propulsion in the third density, which was necessary if one wanted to use advanced tech in warfare, which they very much did, obviously. So Dr. Schorberger had been studying anti-gravity vortexes in water. This inspired his research had actually come from observing fish swimming upstream and how they could just basically do it without feeling the current, and they were working against it, right? So he realized that there were little energy vortexes in the water, places where it swirled in a certain way that the fish could intensify that energy by swirling its own body within it, thereby enabling it to jump upstream. Now, of course, Adolf Hitler had actually met Schorberger way back in 1934 to discuss the principles of agriculture, forestry, and water engineering. And he was impressed by the ideas that the doctor had already been exploring around using implosion systems for propulsion. But he couldn't get his hands on them until Austria was annexed and the war was on. And by this point, he knew that he needed Schorberger to expand upon the designs that the Nazis had received from the Draco, so they could build these anti-gravitic flying machines that could be weaponized and used for war. Pretty intense stuff, guys. This is pretty intense stuff. So let's keep going. I'm going to move to the next slide, but we're not so much there yet. So just hang in there. So in the 1940s, poor Dr. Schornberger, a brilliant thinker and naturalist, was captured and institutionalized by the Nazis and made to develop the first Nazi third density anti-gravitic flying machine. Say that 5 times fast, right? Third density anti-gravitic flying machine. And by 1941, it was done by 1942. Aided by their new allies, the Draco and the Nazis were pumping out more than a dozen types of craft, all built by slave labor in huge underground caverns in Germany. Pretty disgusting about that. But as we keep going, the Germans also produced there also had production facilities established in Antarctica, where the Draco had open access to the more vast underground chambers, for them to access the Nazis themselves. There are many caverns under Antarctica, many of which were and still are inhabited by the Draco. Some hold the ruins of ancient, highly advanced civilizations such as Atlantis, and some hold the ruins of even more ancient ruins left behind by their builder race of the Patel 200 million years ago, right? So the Orion group still had their three massive motherships buried under the ice as well, and they cannibalized and made use of much of the Atlantean tech that was still functioning, though they had a harder time doing much with the tech left by the Patel, much of which appeared to be functioning still, but which they could not comprehend, right? It was too much above their pay grade. So the Nazis set up shop there alongside the Draco and the Orion group, where they continued to develop and refine their technology. So now we see a pattern forming, and we know that there is the Treaty of Antarctica. There's so many things that point to the Nazi breakaway civilization going to Antarctica. We hear about them basically after World War II, and they lost. They transferred themselves into South America, which is actually closer to Antarctica, and probably ran back and forth between the two. Also, there was a battle for Antarctica, which we're going to get to in probably the next episode, where Admiral Byrd tried to take Antarctica back from this breakaway civilization that the Nazis had created down there, but it was a lot different. And we see Admiral Byrd talking about the extra continents down there and things that he saw, the flying ships. What if he saw those things, but it was really the strongholds of the Nazis working with the Dracos? That's where we kind of get into this convoluted which one is right. Well, maybe they're both right. Who knows? Maybe they're both wrong. We don't know. Well, let's keep going. So, they set up shop again, like I said. They had their technology refined. And now we go to February 24th, 1942. And I'm going to tell you a little story about a gentleman by the name of William Tompkins, right? A young man named William Tompkins was staying with his dad and brother on the second floor of a nice big apartment 4 blocks away from Long Beach, California, right? The following account of what happens is from his own words. So William Tompkins wrote what I'm going to speak to you next, because this, as we know it, is the Battle of LA. And it's going to show you what is produced once these entities are discovered, right? So let's keep going. So he and his brother were inside laying on the floor and listening to the radio one night when suddenly their dad called them and he called them out to the balcony. He said, "Get out here, out on the deck, get out here now." They went out to the balcony and saw the white light, just a little white dot. How many times have we seen that, right? Hold on while we're telling the story. This is the contact that I get regularly, is seeing little white lights that look like the size of a pinhead. It looks like a star is moving, but it either goes super fast or it goes about 5 or 6 seconds and disappears out of nowhere. Some even have blown up. The white light blew up a little bit, and then it went back to its regular size, went 5 seconds more, and then disappeared, which could be contact, might not be contact. A lot of crazy things have been happening since I started putting this information out. So just to be transparent here. So we get back to the story. They went out to the balcony and they saw the little white light, or a white dot, really, right above the horizon. It was moving, just floating there above the sea. Then it emanated a thin little beam down and to the left, which was clearly visible. They watched this for about 5 minutes, and then suddenly there was a brilliant flash of white light that lit up the entire neighborhood, and then it went out. Not sure what to think. They all went to bed. Then, at about 12:30 a.m. that night, all the anti-aircraft guns started firing. The family startled away by this. They all rushed out to the balcony to see what was happening. They saw directly in the sky above them, at an altitude of about 7,000 feet, a massive ship just parked in the sky. The shells from the anti aircraft guns were bursting on the underside of this thing, actually not even touching it, but bursting just before they hit, as if colliding with an invisible wall. This barrage went on for 5 hours, and nothing at all happened to the ship. During this time, all sorts of smaller craft, hundreds of them, also appeared and swirled around the under of this massive ship, the underside, right? Two of these smaller craft actually were shot down, one into the ocean and one into the streets of LA, but turned out to be unmanned. Although their appearance was bizarre, even that they were quickly spirited away, as bizarre as these ships were to fall, they were taken away by the military very fast. Of course, they don't want anybody to see that. About halfway through this strange barrage, right around 3 a.m., the boys and their father got bored and went to sleep. Now, I know what you're thinking too, right? You're probably thinking, what? They're watching this all happen and they're like, we've been watching for a few hours. Screw it. We'll go to bed. We'll go to bed. I wouldn't have done that, you know. And this is significant, and I'll explain why this is so significant, right? Let's get back. So, to the next slide. At this same time, there were five very important men having a meeting in LA. Donald Douglas Sr., the president of Douglas Aircraft, two Navy admirals, and two Army Air Corps generals. These men witnessed the entire event as well. And immediately afterwards, Donald Douglas Sr. established a secret think tank inside of Douglas Aviation. This think tank went on to research, study, and explore everything they could find that had to do with extraterrestrials and their technology. This was the beginning of a group that we would come to know today as MJ12. Right? So we see these patterns happening. Again, everything happens for a reason. There isn't an action without an equal reaction to it. MJ12 is at the heart of all conspiracy when it comes to extraterrestrial craft. There have been people who have said that MJ12 has had treaties with specific entities, right? Now, MJ12 is supposed to be a secret group. And I'll even tell you that there are people out there today who are posing as MJ12 members. They have MJ12 headers, and they say, well, now it's not so secret, right? Now, these people, I am not sure if I fully believe them. I keep a lot of discernment around those people because MJ12 is supposed to be one of the most highly secretive groups anywhere, right? So, not a lot of people are going to go around and persecute themselves or shoot themselves in the foot, especially people in high places, and say, well, I'm MJ12. You would lose all recognition of status if you were to say that out loud. So when people tell you, hey, man, I'm part of the MJ12 group, look at them with, almost like a fart in the breeze. You have to kind of take it as a grain of salt until they can prove it to you on a level that, is irrefutable. I personally am very skeptical around them. So let us keep going. Back to the story. I digress, right? So these men witnessed all of this. Okay. The ones that we were talking about before that would later become MJ12. There were some men there. Shortly after that, James Forstell, the Secretary of the Navy, handpicked one Admiral Rico Boda to head up a group of 29 naval intelligence officers, all U.S. citizens of German descent, who were charged with infiltrating the German secret space program, right? So these men are being now charged to go find this breakaway civilization and embed themselves in it. Rico Boda was specifically picked because he was Australian and had not attended Annapolis, right? Meaning he had a more open mind than others. He wasn't regimented or hyper fixated on the military. So he could get in there with a little bit more ease without having to play so much of a character. He could play himself, right? So, so only a month or so after the Battle of Los Angeles, William Tompkins was handpicked out of high school to work for naval intelligence. He had no training, no suitable education. He was just a kid, but the Navy High Command picked him specifically to assist Admiral Regal Boda, right? You're probably thinking to yourself, so what are we talking about now? Why are we even going here? Right. And this is going to be a chain of events that's going to essentially set the tone for all the story to come later on. Right. And I wanted to say that basically, I say that to say this. Okay. As crazy as that sounds. And listen, I might not be right, but I'm not wrong. Okay. If you could figure that out, let me know too. It was the Nordic group, the same ET race that had contacted Maria Orstich and the Vril. Over 1 million people witnessed this battle over the skies of LA, and nobody panicked, and nobody had a heart attack. Nobody got sick. Nobody, right? Nobody got, the only people that perished during this time was some folks who got killed by the falling anti aircraft shrapnel. And that is just insane. I mean, for Pete's sake, the Tompkins family got bored with this and went to bed. And no one freaked out the next day or demanded answers. Everybody was just cool with it, which I don't know if I could have done that. Or if the people who weren't cool with it probably got silenced in some way, shape, or form. This is something that, is unfolding as it goes. So, given that and the incredibly swift unfolding of events that followed in the Navy High Command, including the seemingly random choice of a young high school kid to act as the assistant to a Navy admiral in charge of secret espionage ring, right? I think it's fairly obvious that the Nordics telepathically and empathically affected everyone in that area. They did something consciously to either ease their mind or to essentially not erase their mind because people remembered it, but they calmed them, right? They really calmed the entire population of hundreds of thousands of people. So we see that this is happening. It's insane to me that nobody really was up in arms about this. I think that that's one of the wildest things to think about. How did they pull that off, right? Let's keep going so we can find out a little bit more of this situation. So mostly they simply soothed and calmed the population, but they most definitely imparted direct information to that group of five men in that meeting, and most likely to young William Tompkins as well, who shortly after developed a talent for intricate model building and would later go on to design the spaceships for the United States secret space program while working for Douglas and Northrop and more of those same people, right? So my guess, this is just a guess of mine, is that Maria Orstich had told the Nordics what was going on with the Nazis and the Draco and asked them to intervene, and that is where the Nordics sort of infiltrated the minds of the United States military or the United States Navy with collaboration of Douglas Air, right? Pretty, I know it's a stretch, but that to me is the most likely explanation. How else or why else would they do that at this time? There is an active war zone going on, an active war zone. So these entities, to learn more about us, which they probably already knew, weren't over the active war zone, which we see all the time. There are so many sightings during places of war. So many sightings. Vietnam, they shot at a ship. What happened? 5 days later, those same missiles and guns or bullets that they shot at that ship came back and destroyed another boat from another encounter with a craft, like they stored it and saved it and shot it right back at them. Insane. That's insane. So let's keep going. So I think that this whole thing was mostly put on for the benefit of those 5 men, to give them direct evidence of extraterrestrial life and advanced technologies. So much so that they couldn't ignore it. And then to give them knowledge of what the Nazis and Draco were up to in Germany, and also so that they could download designs for the spacecraft into William Tompkins' head that would later be accessed. We know that these lights, and I want to thank David Wallace for this, has been talking about this with me, of how they use these lights to imprint information. They can imprint code. This is how they download information to people. It is a way, right? And David talks about that with me on a regular basis, and this is what happens. So, in late 1942, the group of 29 naval intelligence operatives began to bring back unbelievable reports from Germany about the development of advanced craft that was taking place there. And now, at first, they were disbelieved by Admiral Rico Boda, who apparently had not been given the insider info, just a mission and a mandate. But when more and more operatives confirmed this story, it began to sink in. So now we're going to go back to Germany, because remember, we're looking at two different factions here, and we're kind of going back and forth. Now, this is going to play out like this, where there's the I don't even know if one of them's. I know that Hitler and the Nazis are definitely adversary, right? But I'm not sure if these two extraterrestrial races are really going after each other the same way that the Americans and the Germans are. They're kind of doing it by proxy, right? They're not doing it themselves. So now, you may ask now, if the Nazis had advanced gravitic drives and flying discs in 1942, then why in the world did they not immediately win the war? And that's a great question. But there's a simple answer to that. And you're going to be like, well, it's modern science. I'm not sure. But basically, it's physics, right? And I'm going to tell you why it's physics. Though they had perfected the anti-gravity flight and interdensity travel, they have not yet figured out how to turn that technology into the deadly scalar weapons used by advanced races. So they were stuck with conventional weapons, which use explosive technology and therefore produce recoil. If you put an explosive weapon on a craft powered by impulsion, the the details of the gravity drives are very technical, but implosion was the basic force they were harnessing and using. The result is not good. The recoil knocks the ship all over the place, making accuracy damn near impossible. Plus, it's dangerous to have explosive and impulsive forces operating in such close proximity to each other. You can imagine the frustration of trying to do that. So, but they were able to go into space. And this is the next part. They were able to make it to space with these specific ships, right? And I paused there for a second because they had already been in communication with the Draco on Earth, and that alliance was proving to be fruitful. So the Nazis asked basically, would the Dracos allow the Nazis to build a base on the dark side of the moon in Draco territory? But here's the thing about the dark side of the moon, right? It's There's a ton of races that reside there. It's not just the Dracos, right? The dark side of the moon was already inhabited by many races. It's basically a demilitarized zone where even races that have hated each other for millennia have bases side by side. But there were no Terrans there. folks from Earth, right? Not yet. So the Drake agreed and let the Nazis build a base. And this is where we're going to kind of segue for this evening and wait to repeat, or not repeat, but get to the next part on Sunday, because there's a lot more that goes on. And I see Penny Bradley is mentioned in the chat. And yes, I've interviewed Penny Bradley. I'm actually very good friends with Penny Bradley. And she was part of a German wing called Nachtwaffen. And she was a secret space program, um, I would say abductee at that point. She was also a super soldier. And this is where we see the overlapping between the Galactical information, secret space program, and politics on planet Earth. There is a meld between all of it now. Everything's is going to get closer and closer. We're going to try and refine it down as best we can. Now, again, this is coming from eyewitness accounts, so some of it may jump, but we'll jump back and kind of elaborate on different time periods. So that's what I have tonight. And in about 10 minutes, Omar is going to be going on with Watchers Talk to do Protocols of Saturn. But I ask you please to like, share, and subscribe. Send this out. This information is imperative to right now, because from this point, we see these galactical entities playing proxy war. But a lot of these entities are going to get wrapped up in the cabal, or the 13 dark men from Orion, the 13 bloodlines. They're going to come in from this point, because right now they're underground, they're waiting and wait. Of course, they did promote Hitler to prominence via banking and other different types of things, but they are playing, but they're not out in the open right now. And it's funny because even as of late, without saying too much, there are people who are trying to scoop up influencers, small radio people, people like myself. You know, they're trying to create contact or create a bridge to bring people into this cabal or this new world order type thing. And don't fall for the traps. Don't fall for the traps. That's all I got to say, and that's about all I can say on it right now. Eventually, we'll do a full description of what's been going on. But a lot of weird things have happened since we started doing this information. I bet definitely hit on a few nerves, that's for sure. And it's fitting that the next Watchers Talk show is the Rothschilds, right? Fitting on so many different levels. So, with all that being said, guys, thank you. Thank you for allowing me to do this, right? This has been enlightening for me, and hopefully it's been enlightening for you too. We're not done yet. We've got a couple more episodes to go for sure. And then we're going to start working on the galactical races, so we can touch on who they are, what they do, why they do it, and what their deal is with us, right? So this has been just a plethora of information for the FSF. FSF could stand for either Full Spectrum Family or the Forever Student Family. Either way, it works for me. And you're all a part of that. We're all a part of it together. We're learning together, because we are the ones that we've been waiting for. And as Phil Gruber says, the information is the activation. My name is Rob Yox, and I hope everybody has a great night. This has been Full Spectrum Universe, Galactical Beginnings, Part 14.